All right, it's a couple of minutes past 5 o'clock here in Seoul, so it's a very warm welcome to everybody on the call today. Thank you for joining us for our third and final webinar of March, or on the last day of March today. Today, I'm going to be presenting on hiring the best talent in 2020. And before I tell you what we're going to be getting into, I'd just like to let you know that we do have a Q&A function going throughout the session. So please do utilize that to ask any questions you might want to about the topic that we're covering today, and we will have a Q&A at the end of the session. Thank you everybody for joining from overseas as well. It's good to have an international audience on this very important topic. So before we get started, a little bit about me, in case you're not familiar with who I am. So my name is Gordon Dudley, and I'm the CEO of RDI Worldwide here in Korea. I've been in Korea since 2010, and previously I've worked for 4 different companies in a wide range of industries, and basically now been running RDI Worldwide for just over 4 years. So what we're doing in Korea with our branch office here is really helping global companies to work better with their people. We tend to consult when it comes to HR in a wide range of areas, from performance management through to professional development, leadership, and of course talent acquisition, the topic for today. So that's enough about me, and let's get started into the first overview of what we're going to be covering in this session today. First of all, I'd like to give a kind of snapshot view of the current situation, the talent landscape, and where we are at in terms of recruiting. And then for the bulk of this webinar, we're going to be looking at 5 key focal points. So hopefully these will be stimulating for you, whether you are in management or in HR, and regardless of the industry, hopefully there'll be something that you can take away that you can implement regardless of your current situation. And then finally, we'll have open Q&A. Do prepare your questions. More than happy to answer any questions that you might have. So without further ado, I want to jump right in and start by asking you guys a question. And the first question, of course, the thing which almost every conversation starts with these days is that COVID-19. So I'm going to launch a poll now for everybody. And the simple question is, how have you been affected by COVID-19? And I want to get an understanding for you and your business to be able to pitch this webinar in the best possible way. So please go ahead and make a choice. All right, so a couple more seconds there. As you're being hypnotized by the question mark on the screen, multiple colors, sending you subliminal messaging. All right, so time is up on the poll. The results are in, and I'm seeing that actually 50% are saying that they've been heavily affected, and the remaining 50% have been considerably affected. So perhaps a kind of subjective feeling about the difference between considerably and heavily, or perhaps certain industries might have not yet felt so badly affected, might be coming into that in the future. Hopefully not. Hopefully, if you've only been considerably affected, that you won't get more heavily affected. Luckily, nobody said that it feels like Armageddon. Though if somebody had selected feels like Armageddon, I'd be wondering what they're doing on this webinar. They'd be having more important things to deal with. So let's move on. Thank you for joining me on that poll. So let's move into the first area that I'd like to talk about today, which is just really setting the scene for the current talent landscape and where things are at in terms of recruiting. And for me, it really is a new era for talent management. And I say that because we have a situation more than ever before that people entering the workforce and those job seekers who are perhaps of younger generations are having a fundamentally different relationship when it comes to companies and work. Traditionally, we would talk about work givers and work takers, which suggests a very passive relationship between employees and employers. But these days, because of developed markets, because of a situation where we are able to survive without having to have that immediate pay in order to be able to survive, we end up asking this question: why should I work for you? And as soon as an employee or a interviewee or basically anybody out there in the market starts asking the question, why should I work for you? Then the relationship has fundamentally changed. The needle has shifted for companies to be able to actually have to try to appeal to those people in order to be able to hire the best and brightest talents. And that's why we've seen in recent years the so-called war for talent has been becoming ever harder and harder in certain sectors to be able to get exactly the right talent. That is basically one of the fundamental shifts that we can see when it comes to hiring the best possible candidates. Furthermore, the job market is also full of choices. So we see now that there is more choice than ever before for people in terms of their career paths. If we talk about the Korean situation, in the past, people would really only favor large, well-established, famous companies, which everybody knows. Those were the areas of that job seekers would constantly seek, and that people would really only choose when it comes to a job. Now, of course, there's much more diversity in the workplace. We have startups since in the last 20 years, a whole new economy leading to much more diversity of choices. And the general market environment is low unemployment and low growth. Of course, this sounds a bit precarious to say on the 31st of March, as we are seeing the unemployment numbers, especially in America, shoot up, and also across Europe, where we are seeing a huge spike in those jobless, all of a sudden due to the very sudden and dramatic effects of COVID-19. So apart from the very current situation, there is the general atmosphere of low unemployment and low growth. What does that mean? For employees, it means that they are in a more stable and luxurious situation to take their time to choose where they work and in what company they choose to join. And from the employer side of things, it becomes also less, they're not in high growth, therefore the immediate urgent need to hire is also not requiring them to just take whoever they can get. So on both sides of the equation, we see this kind of market situation changing the relationship when it comes to talent acquisition. And lastly, when it comes to talking about this current situation, we see generally an increase in global mobility. So the ability for people to give work in any country, in any place that they want with free choice. Now, we see increasing number of supporting programs. We see increasing flexibility when it comes to working visas around the world. This is a general trend. Of course, again, bring it to the current situation. We have essentially a global freeze on international travel. By and large, training is not happening overseas. People are not being seconded overseas. And when I talk about RDI, we have been taking summer interns for a number of years now in Seoul from Hong Kong Baptist University on a special program. that program, as one example, has been suspended due to the current situation. So apart from the current situation, really putting the brakes on global mobility, the general trend is for more flexibility and more ability for people to work wherever they want. And that's again making it harder for any one company in any one place to be able to hire the talent that they truly seek. When it comes to HR, and I'm not sure when it comes to the audience today whether you are mostly working in HR or working in general management, but what's the kind of infrastructure that we need to see in order to be able to get the right talent? So maybe I hope that you all can identify with at least one of the next 3 slides. First of all, small businesses. So that's classified as less than 100 employees by the source here, Workology. And you can see there, starting from the top down, the CEO, the HR director, and then 2 HR personnel. So the HR specialist and the recruiting coordinator. And that leads to a ratio of 3.0. For every 100 staff, there are 3 HR personnel. And this is a kind of ratio that we track for how comprehensive the support coming from HR is. When we move on to mid-sized mid-sized companies, then of course the HR infrastructure necessarily also grows. So classifying as 100 to 999 employees, we now see that there is a recruiting director with a whole recruiting team under them, and there is an HR director now covering both HR management, of course payroll and C&B, within a much larger HR infrastructure. And that takes the ratio to 1.2 because the organization itself has grown much larger. So some specialization when it comes to the HR, but also a lot more employees to cover when it comes to talent acquisition. And then when we come to large business, so some of the most largest companies in the world with 1,000 employees plus, we now see that the HR infrastructure becomes much more specialized and multiple tiers. We have a CHRO. At the top, we perhaps have a chief diversity officer in some cases. Then below that, a VP of HR, and recruitment is on one side, compensation benefits. Even L&D gets a team with an in-house trainer. So at that point, the HR ratio becomes less than 1, just 0.72 per 100 employees. And that's perhaps where, despite a bigger HR infrastructure, that the need to hire more people en masse requires even more support from outside. So this is the kind of mix that we tend to see, and the ratio that we, as an HR consulting company, will also keep an eye on when our clients are looking for help. So again, I want to start up another poll. I'm going to move to the second question, which is, where are you on this chart? So I'd like to know, for everybody on the call today, do you consider yourself a small business, less than 100 employees, a mid-sized business from 100 to 1,000, or a large-sized business over 1,000? That's just going to help me get a better understanding of where you guys are for the rest of the session. Okay, some people clicking through on the poll now. All right. So far, everybody has clicked large size business. So that seems to be the representation on this call today. All right. So I will close off the poll there. Yes, and it seems that indeed everybody who voted is working for a large-size business. So hopefully you identify with a very well-structured HR organization within your company, or perhaps you're feeling, oh, I'm in a huge organization and we still don't have the very well-structured HR organization. So either way, which you feel, Hopefully some of the points which I'm going to cover in the rest of the session will be useful for you. All right, so let's now move on to the 5 critical focal points which I would like to talk about for the remainder of the session. A reminder, if you do have any questions, please do click the Q&A button at the bottom and type out your question. We'll be happy to take those questions at the end. Okay, so let's look at the first area that we want to look at today, and that's employer branding. And some of you might be familiar with this topic. Some of you might not really understand what exactly employer branding is. So first of all, let's just state that essentially employer branding describes an employer's reputation as a place to work, and importantly, their employee value proposition. That means, what is it that the general population of people who are familiar with your brand consider your company to be as a place to work? If you are in HR and you have not checked out your company rating on either Glassdoor for international companies or Job Planet for local Korean companies, then you are definitely not keeping up to speed with the current situation of your employer brand. Why is employer brand important? Because basically this is your ability to hire the talent that you want. The companies which have the highest rating when it comes to employer brand are the ones who are falling over themselves from applications coming in, to every position that they're trying to hire. They are not battling to have to find other ways to try to attract and retain their talent. They are famously known as great places to work, and even we see rankings that exist every year for example, the 100 best places to work. And these are some of the places that if you do have a good employer brand, then you're going to see your place on there. If you haven't ever checked out Glassdoor or Job Planet, just to let you know, this is where it is an open platform for your employees and also for interviewees, even if they have not been successful in entering your company, to review and give feedback about your company. And so it's an out of 5 score. And the good news is that as HR representatives, you're actually able to set up a corporate account and actually manage those profiles that you have to try to give information. So it's a great feedback tool to understand where the current sentiment is when it comes to your employee brand. In terms of the employee value proposition, that is something that is perhaps a lot, perhaps a kind of next value, the next level of consideration. But seeing as we do have very large company representations, it's something that I'd like to talk about. So the employee value proposition is basically the combination of these 5 factors: rewards and benefits, affiliation, people, advancement, and work. If we were to put ourselves in the mindset of one of your employees, what are the things which what they feel it means to work at your company? What are some of the factors which they consider to be important or not so important when it comes to being at work and being an employee in your organization? For everybody, there is a prioritization of these 5 things. And you can see at the next level, around the circle in the middle there, that there are more specific factors that come into consideration. Why is it important to take into consideration the employee value proposition? Because if you have a candidate who's interviewing at your company, and you have a very clear idea of what is most important for them, then that is the element of your company that you can show them most comprehensively. For some people, that could be under rewards and benefits. They are some monetary motivation. For them, that is the most high value proposition. They want to know that they are going to be well remunerated. On the other hand, for some other people, it might be all about the people. They want to have that camaraderie with their colleagues. They want to have that great social dynamic they feel that they can be a part of something that they socially want to be active in. And for other people, it might be about the work. It might be that they have challenges, they have some purpose within their work. And having an awareness of this can be a really great starting point to be able to hire better talent and be able to attract the right kind of talent for you. So let's get very tangible. If we're talking about you as an HR manager, what is the essential skill that you need in order to be able to maximize your employer brand? It's a collaboration with marketing. Of course, marketing is the home of branding, and it's marketing that has already specialists when it comes to putting the company's value proposition to customers, as well as to all the stakeholders in the business. So a close collaboration with marketing will help HR to be able to develop their employer branding. It should not be seen by marketing as extra work. It should be seen as an extension of what they do as marketing, because ultimately you can start a virtuous cycle. As the better and more positive the employer brand, the more attractive the brand is in the market, the easier it is to attract better talent, the higher the performance of a company, and therefore so the marketing becomes even more effective. So, like I mentioned, a virtuous circle to be realized there. Let's move on to the second focal point for today, and that is about personalization. For those of you who are hiring at scale, perhaps it seems quite onerous to be able to hire 100 staff at one time. The good news is that high technology tools are making it more easier than ever before. But I want to ask the question, does automating the process necessarily mean a standardized experience, or does it mean a more personalized experience? Again, the good news is that mass personalization is now possible. So whereas in the past, the only way to reach a lot of people was to standardize your message, these days there are sophisticated tools which you can use integrated into your ERP software, and also integrated into your company software that can personalize en masse. So this is basically the expectation that everybody has. If you think of yourself as a consumer, when you log on to a company to make a booking that you've used before, you have a personal account. You have your previous purchases, you have your preferences, and even you're getting suggestions about what you might like to buy. That's now a very, very sophisticated area of analytics that's now covered, that we experience as consumers every day. And the same applies for people when applying for jobs as candidates. They want to also have that same kind of personalized experience. They want to feel that they are being taken through each stage of the process in a kind of personal and friendly way. And that, of course, leads back to the ability to further promote your employer brand and get good feedback. So how does it really look like when it comes to the recruiting process? There are now actually a whole host of very effective video interviewing tools which are out there. The way it works is that candidates receive either a message on their phone or an email, including a link. They click that link and they are automatically directed to a video interview that can be conducted via their webcam. So much as I'm conducting this webinar session with you, a question would come up on screen asking me a particular relevant question for the job that I'm interviewing. I would then give my answer, that's recorded, and all of that is then just automatically collated for you as an HR manager to be able to see the 100 applicants or the 1,000 applicants. The next level from that automation comes now with the integration of AI into the process. The analytics now that are being offered allows the applicants to be actually sorted and prioritized according to your criteria. So you can actually get yourself a top 10 list of candidates based on AI that you have inputted under certain parameters in order to already automatically filter out the candidates who are not appropriate for that particular position. So it's automated, but it's also mass personalized, and that's really a great way to be able to customize your candidate experience as they go through the recruiting process. So what is the critical skill that you need as an HR manager to be able to effectively carry this out? Well, you need to be tech savvy. You need to be digitalized. So this obviously could be a significant challenge for certain companies who are still going through this process of digitalization, but it could be an opportunity for HR to you kind of join the rest of the company in this digitalized way of working. In that way, being able to realize better economies of scale. And although I've specifically talked about kind of hiring en masse, it's also something that can be used at the high end as well. So even for senior level recruitment, if you are able to include video interviewing, then when it comes for you to analyze the candidates at the pre-screening stage, research has shown that there's huge amounts of bias when it comes to just evaluating resumes. Via a video, you're going to be able to much more easily and clearly evaluate that candidate on their abilities according to the questions that you want to ask them. So at both ends of the recruitment process can be very useful. Okay, let's move on to the third critical point that I'd like to talk to you today. And here, I would like to emphasize a kind of building of a relationship between the recruiter and the hiring manager. So whether you're in a large company and this is internal, your recruiting team and your hiring manager in the business, or whether this is an external relationship with an external recruiter, the importance of that relationship is more important than ever before. Part of it is, as I mentioned before, because employer brand is so important. The contact point to the outside world, to the candidates who are applying, to those people who you are trying to get as your employees, are recipients of your employer brand. And so it's important to build that. Those communicators are brand ambassadors. So the way in which they talk about the company, the way in which they explain the jobs and the works and the culture that you have at your company, all will lead to people forming opinions about the company and whether they feel it is a good place to work or not. So choose your brand ambassadors carefully. If you are using an external recruiter, be very careful as to who it is that you are working with, and make sure that they are on the same level of understanding of you in terms of what kind of brand you would like to put out there in the market, what kind of people you're trying to recruit. What I often talk to my clients with is not only what are some of the must-haves, but some of the must-not-haves. And sometimes putting that kind of negative side of the question is equally important as well. I also suggest that you balance the long-term with the short-term. So I think building relationships is something that takes time and something that's to invest in. Perhaps you might be able to get some short-term wins, but if the short-term wins allow you to meet your hiring numbers this quarter, but then you have a huge retention problem later on, you're going to be stuck in the same problem, trying to re-recruit the same positions and trying to catch up months or even more than a year later. So balance this long-term and short-term proposition by building a better long-term relationships. If it's for small companies, consider using a professional. If you don't have your HR infrastructure in-house, then perhaps it's a good time to be able to use a professional to consult you and to make you aware of the talents out there, or at the very least some market research when it comes to your employer brand and how it's perceived out there. When it comes to large companies, build trust. So build trust between your recruiting team and your hiring team, that you are working together as a partnership, and not just to try to hire as many people and get them in as quickly as possible, but to build an ongoing and valuable relationship there. When it comes to the essential skill, here it's all about relationship building, and therefore it's about having a higher emotional intelligence. Having a bit more of a dialogue. Balancing the long term with the short term means seeking more understanding, having more empathy with the recruiter or the recruiting team in order to be able to align your objectives and be able to reach the goal together more satisfactorily. All right, so let's go on to the next key critical point that I'd like to talk about. And this is perhaps particularly relevant for those of you in large organizations. If you have clear awareness of ongoing corporate strategy, then the topic of talent pipeline should be important to you, and definitely an element of your recruiting strategy. The ideal scenario here is that you have on-demand talent. It should not be a sudden surprise that a new organizational change comes about and that you're suddenly struggling to find the right talent. The ideal scenario is much like a kind of turning on the tap, that you have the right talents, no matter what function, no matter what level, to be able to bring on board in the optimal amount of time. This is something that might sound kind of a perfect scenario, but really a lot of large companies who are continually hiring, requiring new talents, are putting into place this kind of talent pipeline. It's an element of succession planning, so knowing the progression of your employees through the organization, those who are transitioning out, and the positions which will need to be filled, whether that's next quarter or in the second half, or going into next year. One of the things which is, of course, a change right here and right now is that we do expect at least 10% more working from home following COVID-19. So although there has been mandatory working from home status for almost all industries right now, apart from key essential and emergency workers, we do expect that at least 10% of all jobs will be transitioned to permanent working from home. That, of course, leads to a much larger talent pool. If we are saying that this job is not does not have to be geolocated in this particular office location, the person can be virtual, the person can be located anywhere, all of a sudden the talent pool has just dramatically increased, because rather than being within a 20 or 30 mile commuting radius, you can extend that to a much greater distance, if not internationally. And that has much wider implications for recruiting as well. The great thing about pursuing a very comprehensive talent pipeline is that it gives you full market visibility. It means that when the CEO comes to you as the head of HR and wants to know where the future opportunities lie when it comes to being at the forefront of the competition, that you know by having full market visibility where your competitors are, where you are perceived in the market, and what it is that people that you're able to recruit find attractive about you. So again, leading back to this employee value proposition and how important that is. That, of course, gives you a time saving. And if it gives you a time saving, then you're more efficient, and you're more productive, you're going to lead to better results down the line. So Again, what is the essential skill that you and HR need to be able to foster this kind of talent pipeline? It's a strategic mindset. It's something that came out a number of years ago, was talking about HR as a strategic partner. I find that a bit cheesy to talk about that, but essentially, if we're aiming at having CHRO at the C-suite level, at the key senior management team, making these strategic decisions, in order to have the right talent pipeline, then you need to have that strategic mindset when it comes to talent acquisition. All right, let's move on to the fifth key critical point for this session, and that is employee life cycle. And this is something that especially we at RDI Worldwide are really looking at very closely. The entire employee life cycle, meaning from recruiting through to onboarding, through to training, through to upskilling, and then also transitioning out. So the entire employee life cycle is what we're talking about here. And I put a little passport there. That's as an employee traveling on their journeys through the company. But the key point here is that we need to adopt a customer mindset. A customer mindset means the same kind of service that you give your customers, you also give to your candidates and those applicants to your company. Even the ones that you are rejecting and not deciding to hire, they might still be your customers in real life. So they might be the people buying your products, consuming your services, even though they are not becoming one of your employees. There's a very famous case study in the UK. So Virgin Media, which is part of the Virgin Group set up by Sir Richard Branson, and they had a very important piece of analytics, that they realized that the up to 30% of all of their applicants that they were seeing through the recruiting process were their customers. And importantly, that up to 50% of those customers who got rejected would also go and cancel their customer contract after the process. They had a rather negative candidate recruitment process, and those who were rejected from the process felt that this is no longer a company that they would like to be a customer of. And so they could have real numbers on an annual basis of millions of pounds that was lost business from a defective recruiting process. So what did they do? They implemented a much more holistic approach, encompassing the entire employee life cycle when it comes to their recruiting, and they were able to drastically cut that number of customers who were switching their business, even if they were rejected from the process. So there is real cost savings to be made, and real brand wins to be realized when it comes to adopting a customer mindset. The next is employee retention. So employee retention often is immediately seen by HR as what's going wrong in as the person in situ, on their job. Why did we lose this person? But perhaps if we take an employee life cycle view on this, maybe we didn't hire the right person in the first place. Maybe that person who we have struggled to retain was not the right person to come on board in the first place, and we were never going to be able to retain them beyond a certain period. So taking this much more broader view of the employee life cycle can actually get to the root cause when it comes to employee retention. And as we all know, it's much more effective to be able to retain a staff member than to be constantly hiring new. If we have a very high turnover, then we really struggle to build a sustainable and supporting company culture for all employees. So that has much more wider impacts. And then of course, the third point there, company culture. So what is the company culture that you currently have? Are you aware of the kind of things when people talk about your company's culture? What kind of things do they say? You probably have an employee survey. It's probably just once a year. But have you thought about perhaps breaking that down into a smaller survey? If you're at a global company, then global headquarters is doing a 1-year annualized global survey. That's fine. What about in your local organization doing a much quicker, rapid, more agile survey, maybe just from a select portion of the employees, a slice, a cross-section of the employee base, and doing that on a quarterly basis. Randomize the selection and just get a pulse of where employees are, so that you can keep much more aware of the culture and where people are at. That's going to help you to keep much more aware of where the current atmosphere is and the culture is. What do we need as an essential skill? Probably you're wondering. Well, it's all about the data analytics. So clearly, when it comes to this area, if you have good data analytics, good visibility of what the kind of the company culture is and where the employee retention issues are, then you're going to be able to have a much more easier job at addressing this. At the end of the day, you can't manage what you can't measure. So again, talking a little bit earlier about digitalization, again, making effective data analytics will help you a lot in this area. All right. So we're doing pretty well for time. I want to summarize those 5 key focal points now for you. So first of all, we talked about how employer brand is absolutely key. That's a kind of foundation for HR when it comes to the outward impression in the market, right through to building ambassadors of your company, your employees who are working with you on a daily basis. We talked about being digitalized and hyper-personalized. There are now some very effective tools out there which you can use, which help you to automate the process, but at the same time keep it hyper-personalized for that candidate experience. We talked about building better relationships with recruiting, whether that's in-house or external. I think integrating from hiring manager to the recruiting side is absolutely key. There needs to be a better understanding of the true business needs in order to be able to recruit more effectively, to retain at a higher level. And then we talked about talent pipelining, so taking more of a long-term view in this very competitive market, no matter the industry. Talent pipelining can help you win the race by being ready, so this kind of ever-ready state, so that if any shocks come along, right now, of course, COVID-19 is a shock that came along, and if you are ready, it allows you to be more flexible and deal with those unexpected things that come along. And then finally, the 5th point was really the value of the employee life cycle, adopting a customer mindset when it comes to recruiting and talent acquisition, and just really from the start to finish, being able to kind of take a more holistic view when it comes to that. So that's a summary of the 5 critical points. I hope it was some food for thought. Maybe you feel like I painted a kind of negative view. I think fundamentally my final word is that recruiting doesn't have to be hard. I think if you have the very clearly communicated and positive employer brand out there in the market, it becomes infinitely easier to recruit the best talent. You don't have to be struggling with not being able to offer more salary because of budget constraints. You can be onboarding people who are excited and proud to be a part of your organization. So thank you very much for listening up until that point. That's the end of the formal presentation. And now I think we can move to a Q&A. So now's the time. If you haven't yet asked your question, we have a little over 10 minutes. So please feel free to ask your questions now. You can click the Q&A, and the questions will come up. All right. So the first question, which has come in here, is as HR professionals, how to build a business case to improve employer branding. It's often not seen as a priority or doesn't seem to have a large budget. It's a very good question. I think on one hand, we all know what the marketing budget is in the company, and marketing budgets are being, utilized across all kinds of different channels. And I think building the case that a part of the marketing budget is something that can be allocated to employer branding is perhaps a starting point in the process. I think the other, of course, a great way to build the case is to take references. So there's some really great case studies out there of companies who have built their employer brand very successfully, and as a result have realized higher employee engagement, better retention, lower turnover, and as a result, better performance. And I think these references are existing in all different sectors. So I'd be more than happy if the person who asked that question wants to ask me directly after this call. I'll be more than happy to provide some references relevant to your industry to help you build that case. All right, another question here. How to use a Glassdoor to help our company? All right, so that's another great question. So there's a survey that comes out every year, which is the 100 best places to work. I think there's probably even more than one of these surveys out there. And the companies which consistently rank the highest are the ones who are very actively looking at their employer brand out in the market. I do understand that there are some kind of corporate accounts that you can set up. I think that initially that is free, and I think that it's possible to use that to answer questions directly on that platform and to provide feedback, much like Booking.com and TripAdvisor, where feedback and reviews go on. You as the corporate HR can address those concerns and provide more information. All right. So if you do have any further questions, do feel free to reach out to me via, directly through my email, through our website, or do check me out on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, as probably those of you who know me well. Once again, thank you to everybody for joining this session. This has been how to hire the best talent in 2020, and looking forward to our future sessions coming up in April, where we'll be looking at more topical HR sessions like this one. Thanks, and see you again soon.